Can you feel it? After decades of mistreatment, an appetite has filled the hearts of patriotic Englishmen for revolution. The people are tired of their tyrannical oppression, and there is a growing sense that something big is about to happen. But is this really an opportunity to take back our country, or are we rushing headfirst into a trap? A trap that will only bring more misery upon us. And who, you may ask, might be behind this ploy? Watch this as I answer these questions. This is the Zionist trap that lies before us. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one to have noticed the very real feeling out there that something big is about to happen. First we had the 2 articles from David Betz and the various podcasts that he's been on, which I believe to be a total psyop. Then we had this tweet from Ant Middleton, then we've had all of these various videos, we've had the Raise the Colours campaign, we've had various people talking as though something big is about to happen, and all of this seems to be leading up to the 13th of September when Tommy Robinson has his Unite the Kingdom rally right near Parliament. I know a lot of people who think of politics as kayfabe, and indeed I share this view, or as, soap opera drama, as a scripted narrative that's sold to the ovine masses. And, the narrative seems to be that things are building up to a big clash happening around the 13th of September. Of course, such a thing is framed as an organic uprising, a natural response to our, utterly terrible government. However, the more sceptical among you may rightly feel that this is actually not organic and has been seeded deliberately by a coordinated effort of either the regime or the Zionists. Some, of course, are genuinely following the news cycle. I did a reaction to British Lander the other day, and I don't believe him to be paid off by the Zionists at all. I just believe him to be responding to, the sentiment on the ground. But the actual sentiment on the ground, where does that come from? Who is pushing all these news stories? Is it really coming organically, or is it being pushed by, various captured Zionist influencers or even the mainstream media? If you think of this as all beginning with David Betz and his promise of a civil war, then, all you have to do is, look at his connections to the regime. Look at all the podcasts he goes on. If you look at my 2 videos on right-wing imposters, of the 6 total people there, David Betz has been on a lot of those guys' podcasts. These are people who appear to be organic and appear to be, legitimately independent, but, we know that they're not that. We know that they're, astroturfed by the regime, they're propped up by the regime, they hang around in regime circles. They're not independent voices, they are regime voices masquerading as independent voices. And even someone like Ant Middleton. Yes, nowadays he's not working for the military anymore, but, come on, he was in the SBS, he had a very popular show on Channel 4, SAS Who Dares Wins, so, undoubtedly he has a lot of regime connections. And of course, someone has said he's left Reform or something, but, he either is or was at least affiliated with Reform UK, which is, kind of another Zionist operation. And even this Raise the Colours campaign, although it has the air of being an organic movement, and probably did even start in that way, it's been picked up and pushed by, various influencers and, other people like that. And now you have stuff like Flag Force UK, which is kind of documenting where on the map these flags are popping up. And, UK Column did a very good piece basically exposing how this is probably a government op. Of course, documenting the location of these various flags. I don't care if it's right-wing coded, it's an intelligence gathering operation no matter what. But yeah, to properly understand what's going on here, I need to go back into the realm of anti-politics. The view taken by the oracles of anti-politics, Scrump and Evelyn, is that, the news cycle is always fake and gay, and pretty much any movement is fake and gay. Or at the very least, it quickly gets co-opted. And we've already seen with Raise the Colours, we've got Sikhs raising the colours, and we've got, the old Murdoch thing of based black guy is raising the colours. It's all ridiculous, of course, and, it seems clear to a lot of people that it's a Zionist effort to essentially do more counter-jihad. It's a response to the various Palestinian flags. And yeah, it all seems to be leading up to this Tommy Robinson March, September the 13th, Unite the Kingdom, which is, of course, another Zionist operation. And so yes, like pretty much all fake movements, it's usually something organic will arise, it will be picked up by someone in the regime or some interested faction, then it'll be publicized all over the media, and it doesn't have to be mainstream media, it can be new media, containment Zionist media, of course Daily Wire, Trigonometry, Andrew Gold Heretics, all these sort of people. And then people hear about it and they want to do the same thing, so you have the air of an organic movement that really has been heavily influenced and controlled by various influential actors. And of course, as I said, people like Ant Middleton, David Betz, Tommy Robinson, and a number of other people who've been involved in this process have known connections to the regime, and some of them even have hidden connections to the regime. So as far as I'm concerned, it seems a reasonable conclusion to make that this is a regime operation, or at least a Zionist operation. But why might all this be, and why do I call it a trap? Well, I believe it to be yet another case of consent manufacture for a state of exception. But what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, a state of exception is a suspension of any nominal laws in a constitution. Although in this case we could potentially have the introduction of new laws, and in which case that's not a exception to the constitution, it's an addition. But in either case, the idea is a constitution, be it an American style constitution or just codified rights and laws and stuff like that, promises one thing, guarantees one right. So in our case it might be freedom of speech, freedom of association, but the regime wants to, for whatever reason, cut down on that and stop people from saying certain things, stop people from organising with certain other people. So they need to create a law or some sort of emergency powers that stop these officially given rights from being exercised, pretty much. Of course though, such a move would be very unpopular. You can't just take away people's freedom of speech, freedom to protest, freedom of association, and expect them to take it lying down. So what you have to do, and we've seen this with the Patriot Act, various counter-terror, internet surveillance and other surveillance, so many things, you need, some big event, some sort of boogeyman that justifies this exception to the law, these emergency powers or whatever these new laws are, being put into place. Recently with this censorship of the internet, the justification was that too many children were seeing adult material. And although that probably was the case, that's now being used to force a lot of people to share their, identities with these various websites, essentially so the government can track what you're doing and what you're seeing. But in this case, yes, let's say the government wants more surveillance rights over their people. They want to be able to search their property, search their devices, all things that I think currently maybe you don't need a warrant, but realistically people expect that you should have a warrant for. The government now wants to break up these, right-wing groups or other sort of groups and, stamp out dissent. Now, of course, the government already has some of these powers, but they're not very well known about, and if it kept on coming out in court that the government was spying on literally everyone, then, the people would probably get quite pissed off and they might, dissent even more. So the government probably wants to create some excuse that allows them to do this without simply just forcing the laws through Parliament without anything ever having happened. Instead, if the government can convince a whole bunch of idiots at this Tommy Robinson thing to try and storm Parliament January the 6th style, then that would be plausible enough an excuse for the government to stamp down on these people, to lock more people up, to investigate their devices, break up these networks. And then of course it doesn't just target the people who are stupid enough to do that, it creates the legal powers for the government to target anyone for whatever they're doing. But important to take from this is that the government loses far less popularity if it does this in response to something like, a riot kicking off in London, than if they just straight up went and did it. And so that's why they have to push people to do these things such that they can get these laws accepted by the majority of the public. Now, I know I've talked before about the alarming nature of true power being destructive capacity, so you might assume that my view is that riots and destructive action at these sort of protests is true power, is something that's good. However, this is subject to quite a few criteria. If your violence is disorganised, sporadic, for this or that event only, not a continually repeating thing, then it doesn't really have much destructive capacity because, you can just send in the police to, shoot these guys with rubber bullets and arrest them, and the actual threat to the state is almost zero. People are not going to storm Parliament on the back of a Tommy Robinson rally, and if for whatever reason that does happen, I guarantee you it's something that was allowed by the state, in the same way that I believe it was allowed in America on the 6th of January. But no, for this to be truly powerful, this sort of violence needs to be organised, and it has to be frequent enough and with certain conditions, such as if you do X, we will do Y. It can't just be pushing against, an abstract, we don't like you, blah de blah de blah. It has to be, if you do this, we will fight back, and these are our demands, you must meet them or we will carry on. If it isn't that, then it doesn't achieve anything. Which is why, 99% of the time, protests and riots do not achieve anything. The only cases where you could say they did achieve something were in the unions for a while, where the unions had explicit demands, but, eventually even there the government worked out how to deal with the unions, and their response was basically to just get rid of all the jobs. So no, I do not think a violent, LARPy insurrection at the Tommy Robinson rally is a good idea by any means whatsoever. I do not recommend people to go in the first place, but if you are stupid enough to go, seriously, don't get involved in anything like this. You are only going to create consent manufacture for the government to, put the boot down even harder on all of our collective necks. So yeah, all in all, I feel like, there's a real sense growing that something big is about to happen, but of course, I have enough knowledge to know how these things have gone in the past to know that, this isn't an organic movement, things don't just happen organically. This is definitely a Zionist operation, it's controlled and influenced by Zionist influencers, it's not going to be for our good. If anything happens, it will just be used as justification for the state to say, oh look, the far right, the evil far right, the far right terrorists, blah de blah de blah, come down harder on all of us, just, decent patriotic chaps who want the best for our people, and we're going to be the ones who get the short end of the stick. And of course, people have been posting a lot of things that, in previous years wouldn't have been accepted. There's been a lot of noticing of the certain, Middle Eastern desert tribe. There's been a lot of explicit racism. There's so much that the government could decide to just suddenly stamp down on, and we'd all be, losing out because of it. So yes, this is what I think is happening. I think it's all a trap. I think, I don't think Tommy Robinson encourages it necessarily, but I think he's in on it, and I think he, only says don't do it, so he gets the plausible deniability of, not having to be locked up, so that he can divert the energy and agitate where necessary as a free man out of prison. But yeah, I do think he might still be in on it. I think, the appetite for revolution, although completely justified, isn't going to actually lead to revolution. You need an organised, powerful, elite faction to do that, which we do not have. And so essentially, yeah, if you are stupid enough to go to the Tommy Robinson rally, please, whatever you do, don't get sucked into any sort of mob violence. You're only going to bring it worse on us. Anyway, that's all for this video. As always, down below there's a link to my Discord, my Twitter. You can subscribe, like, and watch many other videos. And I think YouTube's introduced this new hype mechanism where you can somehow hype the video and it will push it to more people, so I'd appreciate it if you did that. Anyway, other than that, I thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next one, and for now, cheerio.